evening. I'm Melissa Ridgen.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to our election 2021 APTN National News Election Night Special.
For the next 2 hours, we will be bringing you live election results from across the country, and we will have plenty of analysis from our guests.
Some of those guests joining us here in studio is Michael Redhead Champaign, a Cree advocate for Winnipeg's North End and Indigenous peoples. Michael's also an author and a speaker. Also with us here in studio, returning from debate night, is Will Guidon. Will is the Minister of Housing and Property Management for the Manitoba Métis Federation.
And joining us tonight from Edmonton is Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, who is a former band counselor, currently the Executive Director of the Yellowhead Indigenous Education Foundation. Jody most recently ran for National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. In Toronto, we have Pam Palmater, a Mi'kmaq lawyer and the Chair of Indigenous Governance at the soon-to-be renamed Ryerson University. Thanks all of you for joining us tonight. What a great crew we have.
Yes, thanks to you all. We'll also be joined tonight from Ottawa by our Brett Forrester, the host of Nation to Nation, and Brett's got Wayne Gardon-Williams, a self-professed political junkie, with them. Wayne's a 60s scoop survivor from Saskatchewan and is now an Ottawa-based lawyer. And of course, we'll have our reporters fanned out from coast to coast to coast, and we'll be checking in with them throughout the night. We're already seeing some surprises here tonight with results on the East Coast. Bernadette Jordan, Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, has lost her seat in South Shore St. Margaret to Conservative Rick Perkins. We're going to be hearing from our reporter out there, Angel Moore, soon. But Pam, do you want to maybe start us off with your thoughts on Bernadette Jordan losing her seat?
Well, I don't think anyone's really surprised that she lost her seat. She completely mishandled the entire situation in Mi'kmaq. Not only did she not come out and talk about what was happening with the non-native fishermen, but she certainly wasn't doing anything to defend the native rights of Mi'kmaq fishermen out there. So on both counts, she lost. You can imagine that there's a large number of voters in the non-native community there that if they're not going to take action to stop Mi'kmaq fishers, then we're going to vote in the Conservatives, because we know they will. We know that they'll stop Mi'kmaq fishers. So that really raises some significant questions from people in Mi'kmaq about what's going to happen as we move forward.
Results still coming in here, but we're seeing the Liberals there out in the lead with 74 predicted to win here right now. The Conservatives at 36. Does anybody feel like making a prediction here on what we're going to see tonight? Another minority government? I know there was some talk we might not even see results, final results tonight. Will, maybe we'll start with you. Any predictions?
My predictions, I don't want to jinx anything here, so I want to be very careful, but all the polls are pointing towards something similar to what we've just come out of. So I think that's wouldn't be too far off the mark. But there's some key races, as we already looked at, that could move here or there. One of the things I think we need to keep a watch on is what the People's Party does as far as taking votes away from the Conservative Party. I think that there could be some potential surprises there when that all filters out at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I guess that's the other thing we were just saying too. It's been largely boring this election. I do believe we both agreed on that. Do you think that we're going to come up with the same thing that we went into this election with after all of this?
I agree. I think it's going to be pretty similar when it comes down to the end up results. But I think what I'm excited for is definitely to make sure that we have a minority government. I don't know about you or the voters out there, but I think that a lot of us expect political parties to work together, and majority governments have a tendency to run ramshackle, doing whatever the heck they want. And so I have this audacious dream that in politics, parties and people will cooperate along with one another to get things done.
I'm not feeling cooperation. In this campaign, it seemed everybody was angry. The voters angry. All the leaders seemed angry. I don't know if we can expect cooperation. Jody, I'm curious, your thought. Is there anything that really stuck out in this campaign for you?
Absolutely, that they spent $610 million that could have been spent on clean drinking water, on families in need, as well as they've exposed every First Nation and Canadian citizen to the COVID-19 pandemic by having people go out to voting sites. So it was terribly bad timing, disappointing, and I think we're going to have the similar governance that we've had for the past 3 years.
Will, we were talking about this, 610 million somewhere roughly in there.
Yeah.
As a Minister of Housing, how's that sitting with you?
How many houses would it buy?
Yeah, no, that's one of the things I think about. Either I'm driving down the road and I look for slingshots in the trees, or I look at the houses that we can build. One of the things that I was thinking about as we look and see what happens in as far as the numbers are coming in, is whose job is safe afterwards? Is anybody's job going to be safe if it's exactly the same thing that we are looking at in Parliament today?
Yeah. Pam, anything that stuck out for you during this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, lots of things stuck out, but I think the biggest thing was really this disconnect between the federal party leaders and Indigenous issues. I mean, what issue, aside from the pandemic, dominated the media for the last 2 years? It's been Indigenous issues. Wet'suwet'en Strong, 1492 Lamback Lane, Mi'kmaq fishing right, murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, kids in foster care. I mean, you name it, and then the unmarked graves. And that Canadians said, listen, the issue that we care about, the majority of Canadians said, is reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Wow, they had an opportunity to just run with that.
Yeah.
And instead, they just picked from the headlines this, incoherent set of platforms.
I think they maybe figured that 11 minutes on the reconciliation topic at the debate was that was enough. They spent an entire 11 minutes talking about reconciliation. They could move on with the rest of the campaign, perhaps.
So Jody, maybe where did things go off the rails here if we're spending 2 years talking about Indigenous issues? Now politics is in the forefront here on a 36-day campaign, and it's radio silence.
Sorry, Dennis, it's very muffled.
Oh, sorry. Just wondering, how did we go from spending 2 years with Indigenous issues in the forefront, and then we have a 36-day campaign where we spent 11 minutes on it?
Well, we didn't spend 11 minutes on it.
Right.
We've been spending our lifetimes advocating. And, the disconnect, as Pam talked about, and the cognitive dissonance between Indigenous issues and Canadian politicians needs to be addressed. And Canadians are also saying that this needs to be addressed. And so whoever becomes the lead of this Canadian state government is going to have to be held accountable.
I'm curious, you've got your finger on the pulse of all the young, cool kids. What were they all talking about that would be driving them out to vote this time? Or were they disinterested? Was there still that kind of young voter apathy, or did you see any change in that?
Well, I think we saw a lot of cringe-worthy behavior when we see political party leaders trying to engage young people. I saw a number of things on TikTok that made me question who's advising these folks, but I think that what really has been lacking from this election was an ability to have lighthearted conversations in an educational way. So I really am pretty disappointed in the way that young people were reached out to throughout this election.
What are they talking about, though? I mean, mine's way too young to vote, and what I consider my young friends would be in their late 30s, hardly young people. People in their 20s, what are the issues for them, and what were they making of the platforms that they were seeing in this campaign?
A lot of folks that I know were really passionate about electoral reform and the fact that we didn't get it in this last election or in this last government. But the other thing, I'm from Winnipeg North. We have a high rate of child welfare and child welfare apprehension in our community. So we really wanted to see solutions that support families, that help get kids back in their homes, that support parents. And so one of the questions that we asked all candidates when we had a candidates forum in Winnipeg North was, will you support enshrining parents' rights in legislation? Because if you look at Canadian law, parents don't have rights. Children, governments, agencies all have rights. Parents don't have rights. So how are parents supposed to navigate the legal system where child welfare cases so often go to without having any legally enshrined rights?
Did you hear any answers that you liked?
Everybody says yes, nobody does it.
Well, I hope you have those tapes, because those will
Got the
come in
tapes.
handy regardless of who
We got the
wins
tapes.
tonight.
We
You got the
tapes.
receipts?
We got them.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands of Indigenous children in care in this country, but they were handing it over with Bill C-92, the child welfare system, back to Indigenous peoples. But we have Quebec is fighting that in court right now. Pam, did you think maybe we might hear something on child welfare throughout this whole campaign?
Well, certainly not a lot. What we did hear, especially at the debate, was the banter back and forth where the Liberals are saying, we're not doing First Nation kids in court. What are you talking about? And the NDP saying, wait a second, we're watching it live on TV. And so, again, this real I don't even know what to call that. Is that a disconnect? Is that an untruth? Is that not factual? I mean, literally, we continue to fight First Nation kids in court. They're not abiding by Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. So set aside Bill C-92 and whether or not it's effective. There's a lot of critique around it and certainly very little money attached to it. But what are they doing on the ground? I mean, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal says, listen, stop discriminating, fund First Nations in care, support First Nations, support families, have Jordan's principle, stop discriminating against kids without status, and they continue to fight the entire way. And we would like to think that going forward, assuming they get a minority government, they would actually preserve their position.
Okay, we're going to head off now to Ottawa. That's where Brett Forrester, the host of Nation to Nation, is standing by with Wayne Garnon-Williams. Brett.
Thanks, Dennis. Wayne Garnon-Williams is Plains Cree from Treaty 6 territory and a senior lawyer at Garwill Law in Ottawa. He is an expert on international intertribal trade and has more than 2 decades of experience with not-for-profits, Indigenous organizations, and the federal government. But tonight, he's here to talk politics. Mr. Garnon-Williams, thank you for joining me. Many believe Justin Trudeau called this election to get himself a majority government. Has he ran a campaign that deserves to win it? Why or why not?
Yeah, hard to say right now because it's the will of the people. He's done a whole bunch of stuff for Indigenous people. We've seen an awful lot of spending, and we've seen half achieved promises. And the question is, can he come through? Is there enough belief in the voters to be able to take him the rest of the way? That's the question tonight, and it's up for grabs. Who knows? It's one of the things that it's amazing about democracy is that the people will decide this. And it's really cool because when we look at the kind of work we've done with respect to, for example, Indigenous sensitive ridings that are out there, a little bit of a claim to fame. I brought in this little document. Back in 1984, when I was a student working for the Assembly of First Nations Parliamentary Liaison Unit, I did the research for Indigenous sensitive ridings for the 1984 election. And today, the Assembly of First Nations is still producing these wonderful documents that show us the kind of strategy and what's out there for Indigenous peoples. Like, for example, right now, in this election, there are 24 ridings that are Indigenous sensitive, which means that they are the margin is so close that Indigenous votes, if it was block voting, could swing the vote one way or the other, and that's a great way to push policy, get politicians to get alongside with respect to Indigenous issues. And the other thing that's really cool that the Assembly of First Nations has done is they produced a document that shows that 77 Indigenous politicians have thrown their hat in the ring. And that's exciting too, because we've never seen so many candidates. And what effect is that going to have with the next parliament? Who's to say? Let's turn the page and find out.
Okay, now you mentioned spending there. Elections Canada estimates it may cost $610 million to run this mid-pandemic vote, which would make it the most expensive election campaign in history. Was it worth it for the Liberal leader, or did he kind of misread the crystal ball here?
Yeah, it's up to the will of the people. And the cool thing about that is when you look retrospect in the work that Trudeau has done, let's assume this is the end, just for the sake of argument, This is the end of the Trudeau era. What has he and his government done for the last 2 terms? What have they done? Well, one of the most important things that I can see as a legacy from a political science standpoint, from a historic standpoint, is in the ministerial mandate letters. And we're broadcasting from Ottawa, the heart of government. a lot of people that are watching will understand ministerial mandate letters, and they're a relatively new thing publicly in the fact that a prime minister will announce their mandate saying, this is what we're going to do. And the cool thing about the Prime Minister Trudeau is that he put in every single mandate letter to every single minister for the last 2 terms that he values no relationship more important than that between the Crown and Indigenous peoples. And that, from a public administration point, is really important, because when you put a mandate promise that, I value this to your minister, the minister will take that and go, I see, this is important to my boss. I'm going to go to my underling, my deputy minister, make this happen. The deputy minister will look at it and go, oh, this is important. I'm going to go to my ADMs to directors general to directors. And there's a performance incentive that if you perform based on your required mandate you have to achieve for your boss, you get a bonus. Never in the history of the Government of Canada has this happened from a public administration point where Indigenous issues are part of the mandate and part of the performance bonus system for government to actually achieve things. Have they achieved it? Halfway. Will there be a mandate to continue? Who knows?
Okay, I want to turn to the Conservative leader, Erin O'Toole. The pollsters had Erin O'Toole and Justin Trudeau deadlocked coming into today. So what would it take for the Tory leader to pull off an upset today?
I guess it would have to be voter frustration. A lot of things are in play, a lot of factors. The pandemic, if voters are concerned about overspending, if voters are concerned about issues that will play to the Tory concerns, then we might see a change in government. And that's the will of the people, and that's the magic of the electoral system. And it's unfortunate, though, with Indigenous people, because we only represent 5% of the voting population, and so it's hard to get our issues on the table. And this moment of history has been very unique, because another thing that's important is that there's been, up until the Prime Minister's mandate letters, previous Prime Ministers have said, if you are an Indigenous right, you prove it. You bring it to court, and you bring it to the highest court, the Supreme Court of Canada, and then we'll maybe consider applying it, but we'll apply it minimally. This government, on a lot of issues, said we're going to take it as a prima facie that there's Indigenous rights here, and we're going to negotiate what we can do to move forward to realize those rights. That's important, and that's the first time that's ever been done. So that's another historic first when you look back upon the Trudeau era.
Okay, Mr. Garnons-Williams, we'll have to leave it there for now. We'll have lots more to discuss as results roll in. It certainly is still early, and there's lots of race left to run. Melissa and Dennis, back to you.
Well, let's start off in the east with some early poll results. Bernadette Jordan, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, she's lost her seat. That's in South Shore, St. Margaret. Let's go there. Take a look. She has lost to Rick Perkins, the Conservative candidate there. So that's the riding. Violent clashes between the DFO, non-Indigenous fishers, and Mi'kmaq exercising their right to treaty fish. Let's go to Sydney, Victoria. We've got Jaime Baptiste has held on to his seat there, followed by Conservative Eddie Orell. Jeff Ward was the Mi'kmaq candidate for the NDP. He came in third, as you can see, too. Let's take a zip over to Labrador. That's where Yvonne Jones is the incumbent. She has kept her seat in that riding of Labrador. It's a Liberal stronghold. It's only been handed over to the Conservatives once, but Conservative Shane Demaresque lost tonight. Jones also beat out fellow Inuk Amy Norman. She ran there for the NDP. She was active in Labrador land defense, protesting against the controversial dam project that just got a huge federal cash infusion. I think we have Angel Moore. If we do, well, we're going to go back to our studio here in Winnipeg. Here is Dennis.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, we are going to now throw to some of our reporters, starting off with Angel Moore, who's in Cape Breton, where there's been a number of developments already in the east. Angel.
I'm here at Member 2 First Nation, Unamagi, also known as Cape Breton, where NDP candidate Jeff Ward has lost to Liberal candidate Jaime Baptiste. But the real news in the Atlantic region is Bernadette Jordan has lost to the Conservatives. This comes 1 year after the launch of the treaty fishery that was met with violence from the commercial fishermen, and DFO officers hauled traps and made arrests, including a 14-year-old Mi'kmaq youth. Talks between Jordan and Mi'kmaq leaders failed, as Jordan always insisted the Mi'kmaq fish within the commercial season. Back to you, Winnipeg.
Thanks a lot, Angel. We're going to head to Quebec now. That's where Lindsay Richardson is standing by. She's at Liberal headquarters in Montreal. Lindsay.
Well, it's a little bit difficult to properly gauge the pulse of the room here at the Fairmont Queen Elizabeth in downtown Montreal, because this is, after all, a pandemic election. And because it's being held in Montreal, that means that we've had to observe several public health guidelines. So they've capped the total attendance at this venue at 250. Everybody who is currently in the room has had to scan their Quebec-issued vaccination passport at the door. And the rule seems to be, if you're not vaccinated, you're not allowed at Liberal HQ tonight for election night. So as you can see behind me, there's not much to see right now. It's still a little bit early, but things are expected to pick up at some point this evening. Ville-Marie is, after all, a Liberal stronghold riding and has been since 2015, and it's incumbent to somebody that you know quite well, our Minister of Indigenous Services, Mark Miller. We're still awaiting news of whether Miller will physically be here later in the evening, but we know will be. We'll be sticking around until Justin Trudeau comes out to give his speech later tonight. Whether it'll be a victory speech or a concession speech, we'll have the latest for you as it's happening. Stay tuned for later on in the show.
Awesome, great to see Lindsay there. So I want to ask here, we've got party standings here so far. We've got 127 Liberal seats, 62 for the Conservatives. Bloc have 26, 17 for the NDP and 1 for the Green. Anybody seeing anything there that's surprising them early out of the gate, obviously?
Yeah, for me, I think that red is pretty darn tall there. And a couple of friends of mine called a Liberal majority. That seemed a little stretch at the time, but you know, you're looking here and things obviously happening in Southern Ontario. There's going to be more stuff coming in. The West is obviously completely different, but this is, I think it's something maybe we should have been a little more watchful on things. You never know. Like, as they say, the only poll that counts is the one on election day, and that's what we're seeing right now.
We're just seeing the very beginning.
Yeah.
Are we going?
Well, let's, you know, these are just elected and leading right now, but 127, 170 needed for a majority. Jody, your thoughts on, you know, looking pretty good for the Liberals right now?
Yeah, but the West is wild and unpredictable. So they can enjoy it now.
Jody, one question on that. We had our reporter earlier tonight, Tamara, doing a story on, as we all know, COVID has been really hitting Alberta hard lately. Tens of thousands of voters are going to be isolating and unable to make it out. Is the pandemic going to be a factor out in Alberta?
You know what's really surprised me is that the Assembly of First Nations was capable and competent enough to organize an online voting system. What is quite shocking and surprising is that the federal Canadian government isn't able to assure that Canadian citizens and First Nations are safe by creating some sort of online voting system. So, you know, sadly, many people had to stay home because, of course, we have a crazy outbreak. And so many loved ones have been lost. It's been a terrible time, an atrocious time to call an election, and there wasn't anything done to keep people safe.
Mm-hmm. Pam, I had a question for you. You know, record number of advanced voting, like 6 million people voted. What was that signaling to you when you hear that number? And then when you're looking at the preliminary results coming in right now, is there a disconnect, or are you seeing what you thought you'd see?
I kind of thought, for the most part, I would see this. I think when you see a significant number of, you know, advanced votes, and also the additional 1 point something mail-in ballots, don't forget about those. So that's like, you know, almost like advanced voting too. You add those together, and that's a lot of people who want to make sure they get their vote in. so that they're not going to miss anything. They're not going to miss out because lines are too long, or they miss it from work, or there's another COVID outbreak that prevents people from getting to the polls. So there's a significant amount of people who care, and I wouldn't actually be surprised if we saw pretty good voter turnout numbers this year. I mean, it varies from year to year. 2011 wasn't so great, but it's looking like a lot of people care very much to have a say on what happens going forward post-pandemic.
Do you think, Michael, we saw a red wave in 2015, Indigenous voters came out, full throttle support for the Liberals, a little less so in 2019. What was the feeling that you were getting for 2021? Where was the support going?
For 2021, I think a lot of the support was going towards, a lot of the time, here's what happens with these campaigns, all right? They get so leader-centric, all right? So we're in this moment of having such leader-centric campaigns where a lot of people are not familiar with their local candidates. People are not showing up in their communities or knocking at their doors. And so people only know the folks that are in charge of these parties. And so a lot of the people are like, well, I only know Justin Trudeau, and so I guess that's who I'm going to vote for, because the other party leaders don't necessarily have that same familiarity. And so, name recognition is everything. And so, unfortunately, I don't think the political parties have done what they need to do to make sure that voters are educated about how to vote, why to vote, where to vote, when to vote.
I don't think political leaders want them to be educated. I think there could be an argument made that they would prefer that you not know what they are all about and what they're up to.
We're going to go to Nunavut now, where there is only one seat up for grabs, and there is no incumbent running there when new Democrat MP Mumila Kakak decided that she didn't want to run for a second term. Nunavut's single federal seat was back in play in an election now in full swing. So let's head to Iqaluit, where Kent Driscoll is standing by.
Yeah. Can anybody else hear Kent? Okay, we'll come back.
Apologies there. We're having some trouble with Kent, as you can imagine. The feed isn't always that great from up there in the north. We'll bring you Kent as soon as we get a chance to get him there. But just checking in again here, 132 to 170. The Liberals not far off from where they were when government was dissolved. We're going to head out to the Kenora riding now, a massive riding. That's where our Michelle Karlenzig is standing by. More than 33% of the eligible people that can vote in that riding are First Nations. The riding has been held for the last 2 years by a Conservative, but it has been held many times by the Liberals as well. Michelle is at NDP candidate Janine Seymour's headquarters at the casino in Rat Portage. Michelle.
I'm here in Rat Portage First Nation, just outside of Kenora, Ontario. This is the home community of Janine Seymour, the NDP candidate for the electoral riding of Kenora. It's just one of over 40 First Nation communities that fall in this district. And sources tell us today that 3 of those communities, Pikangikum, Cat Lake, and Poplar Hill, all did not have polling stations today. There's disputes over whether or not that was agreed upon beforehand, but as the story develops, we'll be following it. As you can see behind me, there's not very many people here today due to COVID restrictions and concerns, but despite the lack of people, the morale is high, and the people behind Janine Seymour today say that the Indigenous voice is very much needed in this riding. And as the election results come in, we'll be following it, and we'll see if Kenora will have its first ever Indigenous female representing them in the House of Commons. I'm Michelle Karlenzig for APTN News.
Love it.
Thanks, Michelle. As you mentioned there, and as we had on earlier in the news, we've already heard of issues with polling stations. 3 or 4 First Nations in the Kenora riding had some issues. Anybody else hear of any irregularities? Jody, I believe there was also a First Nation in Alberta that also had some issues out there.
Hadn't heard, but that's unfortunate. Hopefully they get that solved and figured out. And it's exciting to watch these ridings to see how well our people do in Canadian politics.
Yeah. Well, I know, speaking of polling issues, the Six Nations, they took issue. A group of people went protesting there saying, sorry, we were not having a foreign election on this territory. This flies in the face of the treaties. You can pack up and leave, and Elections Canada did, in fact, pack up and leave. They moved the voting station, I think, 25 kilometers away. So if you were Haudenosaunee and you wanted to go and vote, you could go do so off of the territory. I thought that was interesting. And then on the flip side of that, you've got people who want to vote in Northern Ontario and problems with Elections Canada not showing up on those communities for those people to vote. And apparently, we were talking to Tanya Cameron earlier today, so that's 1,600 voters that would have been affected. And that riding, Kenora, was decided by what, 1,300?
It's been very tight. I remember in
Last
2015, I was there until 1 a.m. It was one of the last ones to be called.
Yeah.
Will, can you talk maybe a bit about the MMF's efforts to get out the vote? Typically, I'd get a text from you guys saying, do you need a ride to the polls? And that didn't happen today, but you guys do have a number of efforts to...
And luring us out with cars.
Did you need a ride, Dennis? If I'd have known that, I'd have picked you up earlier on today.
Well, if I had a Chevy Spark, I would have been able to get there.
Well, you know what you need to do is still you have to go and you got a couple more days. If you took a picture of yourself outside the polls, we can still enter you into that contest. So speaking of that, there was some controversy about the incentive, and we just got a letter a couple of days ago, I think on the 17th, from Elections Canada saying there's no problem. It was completely above board. Of course, they're going to take a look at it moving forward. But, I think at the same time, the MMF was doing part of Elections Canada job, which is to get people out to vote, encouraging people to vote.
And you were encouraging people how to vote.
Exactly. Right. No, but we did at the same time asked all the parties, here's the priorities of the Métis Nation. Where do you fit on this? And we got answers, and we published the answers. Well, we didn't get answers from everyone. There was one party that didn't send us anything. Who didn't answer? The Conservative Party sent us nothing. Again, I'm not sitting here trying to say how to vote, but I'm just saying that if a party took it seriously and wanted Métis votes, then they maybe would have put a little effort into something on the platform, but they didn't, and others did. So that's what we published, and people need to, if you're Métis and your motivation to vote is along Métis issues, here's where the parties stand. Right. So go ahead and vote, and the incentive was really good too, and we got tons of really positive response from the signs telling people to go out and vote. You got my president, his face all over Manitoba, from Lynn Lake to as far south as you can go, and as far as we can tell, it was a huge success. I'm looking at Facebook and Instagram today, and there's lots of people doing the selfie thing.
We both forgot.
You guys didn't? I'm a cabinet minister. I wasn't allowed to, but I still took a selfie and posted it.
Well, if one of us win, we'll take you for a lift in the Spark.
You know what? Then we're going to go. We'll go out and we'll get some shawarma or something next time. Absolutely.
Michael, there wasn't that I noticed this time around a Rock the Indigenous vote campaign of much note, anyways. No, do you know why that might have been? Were you seeing much in the way of concerted efforts to try and get Indigenous people to the polls?
Well, I think what's happened here is that the election came so fast and it's so short that it made it difficult. And it is also coming at the time of the fourth wave, right? This Delta wave of the pandemic. And so it made it difficult, I think, for a lot of folks that normally would do get out the vote campaigns. So it's great to hear what the Métis Nation has been up to. That's fantastic. I know Fearless R2W in the north end of Winnipeg, we serve families that are involved in child welfare, and we held a virtual candidates forum ourselves, and we were able to ask about reconciliation, child welfare, and homelessness. And so that was a great opportunity. Unfortunately, there was a certain party, same one, Conservatives, that did not allow their candidate to participate. And again, that's a frustration for us. Mm-hmm. And I want to encourage folks out there to get involved, but it's frustrating to get involved and to see volunteers organizing stuff in the community and then candidates to disrespect those efforts by saying, too bad.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's a big secret, and I don't think anybody's going to be upset if we say the same thing here. You know, we have reached out to all parties, as we do every election. Come and have a sit down. We reach out to the leaders. You know, we want to talk to you about the issues that we hear from our people, and your thoughts on them and what your party would do for them. And Justin Trudeau wouldn't return our calls or come to sit down, nor would Erin O'Toole from the Conservatives. It seems like the only ones that we can rely on for, you know, coming and sitting down, Green Party consistently, NDP consistently. Now, is it because the other parties don't see that there's Indigenous support? Certainly, maybe that's how the Conservatives are feeling. But the Liberals have enjoyed Indigenous support, and they still won't come and sit at the table. So what's worse, the one who ignores you, or the one who talks sweet in your ear and then doesn't end up being that nice guy after all, right?
No
I don't
comment.
know. How
No
do you
comment
want
on
to?
that one.
I mean, well, we had Justin Trudeau here in Winnipeg last night,
Yeah.
surrounded by many Indigenous leaders, 3
Yes.
Grand Chiefs, MMF president, yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, was that a show of support?
Well, I think that's a big part of it. You look at what the AMC Grand Chief did when the NDP leader was standing behind him, and he endorsed the Liberal candidate in Churchill riding. That was something I don't think I've seen much of before. But you know, last night it was definitely a lot of Shirley Robinson's folks were there. All the Grand Chiefs from Manitoba. There were several, the president, several cabinet ministers. I think that spoke a lot to what the Liberals did when we asked them questions on priorities for the Métis Nation. The Liberals answered those questions, and I think that shows in the support.
Just come to your event then, maybe.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And next time we'll have them there, and we'll be slingshots for everybody. So yeah.
I want to go to Pam. I'm curious, out of who do you get a sense from out of all of the leaders who is most inclined to, if was Prime Minister would walk or would walk the walk?
Oh my goodness. Well, you know,
If anybody.
so definitely not Conservatives. I mean, clearly, certainly not People's Party of Canada, although they're at like 80,000 votes right now. So you're really talking about Justin Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh, but the problem with judging the NDP at the federal level is they haven't been in government, so you don't know what they would do. Every party, every single one is your best friend when they're in minority or when they're in opposition, all of them. I mean, I've heard promises from all of them on everything. But the real test is when they're in government. Now, to Justin Trudeau's credit, he has addressed some of the issues. He did have a national inquiry, did pass Bill C-15. He did do some of the things that he promised, but he didn't do other things. And of course, he bought a pipeline. Yeah. So there's lots of issues that going forward, I mean, they're all calling that he's going to win this election. So it's going to be interesting to see to what extent he still has to work with the NDP to push forward on Indigenous issues.
Yeah, I think we're just waiting for Bruce there in the studio to tell us if it's been called or not. But I mean, when we're looking at the numbers, they're only 4 seats away from where they were with this minority government heading into this. Jody, your thoughts on, it's going to be at least a minority here, I would think.
Yeah, I don't really see a change happening. And we certainly didn't see a rock the vote movement because Indigenous people are torn. I mean, we see social media influencers like Ryan McMahon throwing his support behind Jagmeet Singh. And then we see Hallenbach and his wife Lisa Muskwagon throwing their support behind Justin Trudeau. So we don't have a unified voice across Indian country. So there's no real rock the vote movement. And I really hope that the Manitoba Métis Nation does the same thing for their own elections.
Okay, that sounds great, and I can't wait. And it'll be next year, and not running for president, but
What? Are
no.
you declaring that now?
I'm declaring I'm running for my own seat back again. So yes.
Yes, I'm earlier news there that the MMF election will be postponed until 2022 now because of the pandemic.
Right, the assembly will be postponed, but the election won't be. It'll be next spring, May, June. So we're looking forward to that too.
All right, then.
You can have me back here and we can talk about some stuff too. Yeah.
We certainly will. We're going to go to another tight race, though, that could be shaping up here in the city of Winnipeg, and that's in the riding of Winnipeg North. The NDP's Melissa Chung Mowat is Métis, a second-generation Chinese Canadian. Her mother's Métis and her father Chinese. She's up against Liberal incumbent Kevin Lamoureux, who has owned that riding pretty much since 2010. But prior to that, it was a NDP stronghold for the previous 48 years. So our Daryl Stranger is out there keeping an eye on that race. Daryl.
Yeah, it's finally election night, and I'm here outside of incumbent Liberal Kevin Lamoureux's headquarters. Now, there's not a whole lot going on right now, but Kevin is expected to speak a little later on in the evening. But due to COVID, I don't really think there's going to be a big celebration or anything like that. Now, he's being challenged by Melissa Chung Mowat, an NDP candidate. Now, also running is Angela Bridges for the Green Party and Anas Kasim for the Conservatives. Now, historically, the Winnipeg North riding has bounced back and forth between the Liberals and the NDP over a number of years. Now, over 50% of the riding is a visible minority, and 18% are Indigenous here in the riding. Now, in the 2015 election, Lamoureux won with 69% of the vote, but that number shrunk to just 47% in 2019, with both the Conservatives and the NDP garnering over 20% of the vote in the 2019 election. Now, advocates and people who live here told me that some of the major issues here in Winnipeg North is crime, housing, and homelessness. And early results here from Winnipeg North does have Kevin Lamoureux with a slight edge over Melissa Chung Mowat. But again, the polls are just starting to come in, so there's not a whole lot of polls reporting as of now.
Thanks a lot, Daryl. Michael, this is your riding, Winnipeg North. Any insight you could provide us on what you're seeing there tonight and what that riding means?
Well, there's a definite divide, unfortunately, north-south divide in our riding. The southern half of the riding is the low-income side. The northern half has more higher-income people. We've seen a lot of Melissa, the NDP candidate, in the lower-income side of the riding. And we have not seen a lot of Kevin Lamoureux, the incumbent. But I think that's what we've seen a lot of. And I think there's a lot of frustration in Winnipeg North, at least in the southern part of it, because we do feel a little bit taken for granted by our incumbent. And I hope that Melissa and her strong run is a wake-up call if Kevin Lamoureux wins again, that he has to do better to engage the citizens of Winnipeg North. He's got to do better than going to McDonald's once a week. He's got to actually support building system and political literacy amongst young people in Winnipeg North and not ignore the other half of the riding like he has been.
Shudder to think we may be back here in 2 years or less again. We're going to head back to Ottawa now, where our Brett Forrester is once again standing by. Brett?
Goodbye, Brett.
Thanks, Dennis. I'm here once again with Ottawa-based lawyer Wayne Garnons-Williams. So far, so good for the Liberals. The word continue or some form of it appears more than 50 times in the Liberal platform's short chapter on reconciliation. So what would a third mandate for the Liberals look like?
Well, you'd think that reconciliation was in the debates, and we're halfway there. Canadians need to be gently eased into the concept of reconciliation. Indigenous people know what reconciliation is, and reconciliation, to cut to the chase, it's not what the Conservative leader said in the debate, in the English debate, where reconciliation is about trust and respect and restoring it. That's vacuous platitudes. Reconciliation is really about Indigenous sovereignty and upholding treaty rights. And we're all treaty people. Canadians, Indigenous people, we're all part of the treaty rights. And Indigenous sovereignty isn't a concept that says, oh my gosh, Indigenous people are going to be away from Canada. No, we're going to be part of Canada, but we're going to be an Indigenous nation to be able to make our own laws and chart our own destiny in relationship to, for example, the province. And this is not new. In 1832, the United States Supreme Court determined in by the Marshall Trilogy, determined that U.S. tribes have a form of sovereignty, 1832. And it's taken Canada this long to get to this point. And it's just a matter, and those American tribes, they're not going elsewhere. They're not exercising their independence. They're part of the United States fabric. The only difference is they have autonomy to pass their own laws in relationship to the states and not the federal government. So there's an awful lot of playroom to exercise that sovereign authority. And that's what we need to see for the next term, is to realize recognition of Indigenous sovereignty and the realization of those treaties.
Now, it's interesting that you mention Indigenous sovereignty, because that word and that concept doesn't actually appear in the Liberal platform. However, the NDP and the Greens do promise to respect Indigenous sovereignty. Can you tell me a little bit about how you think the NDP campaign has played out so far?
It's played very well, and the cool thing about this is, if you historically look at the relationship between the Liberal Party in power and the NDPs, even back to the way of Ed Broadbent, you've got NDP ideas that are really cutting edge and forefront, and they come up with some really cool stuff. But the electorate isn't necessarily ready for it. But eventually, because the NDP keep raising the ideas, the Canadian populace says, you know, that's not a bad idea, come to think of it. That's a really great idea. And unfortunately, you get this situation where the Liberals end up taking the NDP product and marketing it as their own idea. And so you end up getting a whole bunch of originally thought of NDP ideas that are packaged under liberal packages. And I think, quite frankly, that the sovereignty aspect that the NDP are leading on, hopefully will be a Liberal package in this government.
Now, the NDP also wants to appoint a special prosecutor to probe potential crimes at residential schools. Now, as a lawyer, do you think that's a potential way to hold the church accountable?
Absolutely. These are crimes. They're plain and simple. They're crimes. You can't ignore that. You can't gloss over it. And quite frankly, this is long-standing. When the church does things, for example, the litigation maneuvers that the church has done, where they basically bleed the assets of a diocese, and they move it on to the next area, so that then there's no money for the claimants in that archdiocese. That's standard litigation maneuvering. The church is a smart cookie, so let's put them to the full task of this. Let's get those documents that they're withholding about what they've done, and let's hold them accountable, both individually and as a large body.
On a separate note, only a week before Trudeau called the election, the UN dropped a landmark report calling climate change, quote unquote, a code red for humanity. How would you rank each of the parties' climate platform?
The climate platforms, well, when we look at the fact that you've got some really alarming things here. For example, Professor Mary Claire Courtenay-Siger, who's the leading environmental legal professor in the world that deals with this stuff, she's come out and said basically that with respect to fisheries, 33% of the global fishing stock is being fished at an unsustainable level. With respect to rivers, we're going to lose fresh water. We're down to minimal amounts of potable water because of what we're doing to our environment. With respect to climate, 37% of global population will suffer heat waves and extreme impacts, and 6.6 million square kilometers of permafrost will melt when it reaches that 2 degrees average. It's going to cause massive change. We need to have stringent measures with respect to the environmental policies. The NDP have some pretty good ideas. I'm surprised the Greens haven't really gone out and really, what would you say, put all their chips in that and really bet hard on their climate issues. But I'm hoping that the Liberals will listen to what the NDP have said with respect to their climate policies and maybe repackage it as a Liberal/NDP idea.
Now, often energy and fossil fuel extraction do come up during discussions about climate change, and equally often these projects take place on Indigenous territories, and they can be quite polarizing. How might resource extraction issues play out in the next parliament, given the urgency of the climate crisis, as you've just described it?
Yeah, the resource issue, it's obviously a balancing act with respect to lowering putting a cap on oil and gas and reducing it to zero over time, because of course workers have to transition to new jobs. And unfortunately, Alberta has not done a great job in seeing the climate emergency and transitioning their oil and gas working people to alternative energy sources, to retrain them. That hasn't happened. So we need to look at a process where we can help Alberta, help Saskatchewan, help Manitoba with respect to the climate change, the tools they need to change over to a green economy. That's just, we need to help those provinces for sure. And when we look at, for example, the environmental chapter of the United States, Canada, Mexico agreement, the environmental chapter is something that was relatively new when it comes to international trade agreements. And that environmental chapter is there to help get those kind of tools to sectors that need to transition to new alternative green energies. And that requires money, time, and the willingness of provinces to want to transition as well.
And many Indigenous people often refuse to vote in colonial elections. Earlier today, Six Nations traditional chiefs booted Elections Canada off of their territory. So what types of reforms need to happen, or what would a decolonized parliament look like in this country? Yeah,
it is the sovereign right of each tribal nation to determine whether they want to have, whether they want their members to participate in the federal or provincial elections, whether or not they recognize those elections as legitimate and valid for their own purposes. For example, the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy issued a statement that says that they discourage their members from participating in elections, election of leaders of other governments. This is a violation of the treaties and commitments of our ancestors made amongst their people and the immigrants that arrived over the past 400 years. So it's the authority, it's the right of each tribal nation to determine whether or not they want their people to participate in the federal or provincial elections.
Okay, Mr. Garnons-Williams, we'll have to leave it there for one more. Back to you in Winnipeg.
Thanks for that in Ottawa. Brett, great conversations there. Let's move east from where we were last time. We're going to hop into Abitibi Bay, James Nunavut. This was Romeo Saganash's riding, of course, when he retired. The Bloc won this seat back in 2019. She has retained that seat. That's Sylvie Berube. And I don't even, I mean, the Liberals were, I guess, closer than you would have thought. NDP pulling down at the bottom there. Let's take a look, too, for Yves Blanchette. Where is he? He's in, well, there we go. Yves Blanchette, of course, Bloc Québécois leader. He has retained his seat there. He is safe. Let's go to Papineau, see how Justin Trudeau is doing. Where are we? Papineau. It's 910. The incumbent's looking like he's doing well there, declared the winner. Well, let's go see how Erin O'Toole is doing while we're checking in on the leaders here. Durham, here we go. Why won't you click? Erin O'Toole, of course, as we said, the incumbent Conservative leader. He looks like he's got a pretty healthy lead compared to the Liberal who is wanting his job. So there's no upset so far there. Let's, while we're still in Ontario, though, let's take a look at Algoma Manitoulin. Carol Hughes has retained her seat there for the NDP. She won by a hefty margin, actually. She's the Deputy Speaker of the House. She defeated Conservative John Sagman. And Luc Pelche, who stepped aside as, or Duke Pelche, who stepped aside as Chief of Wigwe-Mukang to run against her as the Liberal candidate. He was, well, that's a pretty decent showing there. So we're going to go, Charlie Angus, we should check in on him. Where's Charlie? Timmins. I'm trying to look in too many different directions here. Timmins, where are you? Why don't I have a Timmins on here? I guess we can't go. We don't know where, we can't come and check on you, Charlie. We'll have to figure that out at the next break, why we don't have a Timmins on here. So I'm gonna go back to Dennis, and Dennis is gonna tell you where we're gonna go next, what reporter we're gonna check in on.
A little later, we're going to play Spin the Wheel if Michael was right there. We are going to go, we're going to go back to Liberal headquarters now. That's where our Lindsay Richardson's standing by, and things are probably looking pretty good over there, right, Lindsay?
Well, Dennis, I guess you could say that if this room was more full of people, there would be some murmurings of excitement because the Liberals are doing quite well at this point. As you know, they need 170 seats to win a majority government, and at last count, they've just surpassed 151 seats. So things are rolling pretty well. The Conservatives, on the other hand, do not seem to be polling as well as they anticipated. They're doing well in provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta, but they are not reaching the voter base here in Quebec that they were hoping to. Now, we're stationed in the Ville-Marie riding right now, which has been held by Minister Mark Miller for the last 6 years. And so far, Miller is leading in the polls, so it looks like he will win that third term as expected. And it also looks like bigger Canadian cities like Toronto and Montreal are largely voting Liberal. Papineau riding, Melissa, like you said, it's looking like a red riding. So things are evolving pretty rapidly here. It's actually proving to be kind of difficult to keep notes since they are almost out of date by the time we get to this live hit. So it's an interesting situation here in Quebec because despite Erin O'Toole's attempts to really court the Quebec voter base, you know, saying that he was born and raised in Quebec, he understands the issues, it looks like the race here is really coming down to the Liberal Party and the Bloc Québécois, with the Bloc Québécois making some quite ambitious promises to, say, endorse completely abolishing the Indian Act. So in Quebec's largest riding, further north, that would be Abitibi, Bay James, EU Nunavut. Looks like that is going to be a Bloc stronghold, and their incumbent minister, Barry Bay, like Melissa mentioned, is re-elected. So that's what's happening so far here. As you can see behind me, it's still pretty much an empty room, and members of the public haven't really started trickling in, though we did receive word right before going live that Justin Trudeau will be expected to come out and make a speech as of 12:30 tonight. So we'll have an update on whatever is said in our post-election coverage coming up to you tomorrow.
While we got you, do we still have you, Lindsay?
Yes, we do.
Just wondering, you know, we're seeing the numbers inch up here past even where the Liberals were when Parliament was dissolved. Are there not many people in the room, but is anybody there talking about a majority?
There are certain media outlets here that are calling a majority, CTV for one, CBC another, so quite exciting, but there is still a bit of play ahead in the evening, and we'll just have to stay tuned, see what happens. As we know, things evolve quickly. We could go anywhere from here.
Well, I'm sure that room will start filling up there pretty soon. Thanks, Lindsay.
No problem. Thanks, Dennis.
I should tell you that we did find a little bit of information. Charlie Angus over in Timmins, James Bay, he has won his seat. He's been re-elected there for the NDP. I don't know why he's not on our fancy monitor over there, but I'm not sure that he's going to be voting to complain because he will be celebrating his win over there.
Not sure it was really up in the air there, was it?
Who knows what's going on? There could be some surprises here, and maybe in the places you'd expect least. It's not looking that way, though. Very few surprises so far.
Indeed.
We should go to, do we have Merrick now?
I believe so.
Merrick. Okay, so I'm sure if you watched the English leaders debate, you are going to remember him well. Merrick McLeod is an 18-year-old first-time voter. He's Ojibwe. He asked the leaders why he or any Indigenous person should believe anything that any of these people or parties say about reconciliation. He joins us now from Sault Ste. Marie. Hey, Merrick.
How's it going?
It's going. How's it going with you?
It's going pretty good. Got to finally vote for the first time. It was pretty intense.
I was gonna say, so was there a lot of tell us your process. Was there a lot of, did your family go with you? Was there celebrating? Were there selfies? Were you making decisions like at the last second when you're standing in the voting booth, going back and forth? Tell me all the drama. We're looking for some excitement here. We're just saying this is a pretty boring election. Let us live vicariously through Merrick's excitement as a first-time voter.
I'm sorry to disappoint Melissa because it was pretty underwhelming. For me, it was intense just because, I've worked on campaigns before, I've been very involved in the political process, but to finally cast that ballot, like huge for me personally. Other than that, it was just grabbing the voter cards, getting in the car. It was actually pretty good. We got there right before the rush came, so we got pretty much vote, with no issue or anything. But, I have heard in some First Nations it's been pretty rough. So I guess it's kind of the advantage of being an urban Aboriginal, right? But no, it was a pretty good process.
So what are your results on the thoughts on the results that are coming in so far? You're obviously sitting by the TV with popcorn, watching it all come in like a super eager first-time voter would be.
Yes. I've been watching those kind of 20 or so ridings that the AFN identified, and one of them was the fisheries minister. She lost. So it does kind of show that if the Liberals want to get that majority, they really need those First Nations to kind of either be excited for them, or I don't know, I guess kind of forgive them and say, all right, let's move forward, right? Let's kind of forget what's happened. But in the case of the fisheries minister, I guess that didn't happen, did it?
Yeah. I mean, I guess to go back to your question about reconciliation, do you feel that this really was an issue of any importance? Did you see a lot of it on the campaign trail? Did you hear anything that leaders were saying that gave you sort of cause to believe that it does matter? And then I guess also, Canadians, do you think this, they're already moved on from this warm, fuzzy feelings that they had for reconciliation?
For true allies, this hasn't stopped, and especially for First Nations, it never stopped, right? So I think more than ever in this election, there has been more non-Indigenous peoples kind of looking at the platforms, looking at the history of the parties and going, well, for me personally, Conservatives and Liberals, right, they're the ones in charge of the Indian Act. They're the ones that created the residential school system, forced segregation, 60s scoop, I can go on and on and on. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's more looking, because the prime ministerial candidates for me did not really offer much. I was really disappointed in their responses. So it's more looking at the candidates, who's dedicated to really pushing reconciliation in Ottawa. Mm-hmm. But that's not really for me to say, who is and who isn't. That's for the voters to decide, right?
Well, and you're one of them. You are one of the voters, so it is absolutely up for you to say. Pam, I know you were a big fan. When I was on your podcast, we were talking about Merrick. Is there anything you wanted to say to him or anything you wanted to ask him?
Well, I just wanted to have this opportunity to say thank you for asking the question that we all want the answer to, and for doing it in such a thoughtful way. I mean, this is like representing Indigenous voices across the country, so thank you for that.
Of course. I mean, it is an important question. It came from the heart. And, I did get an overwhelming response, especially from my local community, that people, especially First Nations, were like, yes, and that is an important question because we have not had the best relationship with the federal government. So for many people that have been, I've lived fairly privileged. I've been pretty good. But for those that haven't, how are they supposed to trust the federal government? Mm-hmm. If you've been living your whole life without clean water, been living your whole life in poverty, nothing but negative when it comes to the media or your lifestyle because of federal policy, how are you supposed to trust the Prime Minister in Ottawa? So, it was an important question. Unfortunately, I don't think we did get a good answer.
Yeah. Michael? You, I know, are also a big Merrick fan.
I'm a Merrick fan.
Here is a big Merrick fan.
I'm a Merrick fan over here. I gotta say, very proud of you. And I also just wanted to say, you did something so real when you asked your question, all right? Because as you were asking, you ended up like pausing for a moment, and it almost looked like you got like discouraged. And it's like we all got to be there with you as you like the ancestors helped you gather up your confidence, and then you just did it. And I just was so proud of you, and I was like, that's Indigenous young people persevering. That's leadership. I want to vote for Merrick.
Yeah, when is Merrick what's next for Merrick? Does Merrick have, eyes on any political prizes down the road? I think you've got a bunch of people who would certainly vote for you. Maybe come and work for you. Who knows, right?
We'll see.
That's all you're going to give us?
Sounds like you're really thinking about it.
Right away, Melissa.
Well,
I
Merrick,
gotta keep you guys interested.
we appreciate that you stayed up to talk to us today. It's late where you're from, Sault Ste. Marie, and at 18 years old, I'm sure you've got better things to be doing than sitting here talking with a bunch of oldies about politics, except for Michael. He's close enough to your age that we can't call him old quite yet. Merrick, thank you. We really enjoyed you the English debate night, and we are thankful that you could join us tonight. And hopefully next election, which we hope will not be for 4 more years, you can come back for your second federal election and be a pundit here with us.
Sounds great. I'd love to be back. You guys have been doing great work. Keep it up. Jimmy Gwetch.
Thanks.
Unless Merrick's a candidate, and then we'll be spinning the wheel and finding his
Right.
Sault Ste. Marie riding.
Yes.
I'm not sure. Are we going to be heading up north? We are going to head north of the tree line again to try and catch up with Ken Driscoll this time.
Thanks, and I'm here in Iqaluit at the Kudruktivik Food Center, which is the campaign headquarters of NDP candidate Lori Edlow. Now, with early results in, Lori is leading in Nunavut right now, very few polls reporting, but she's running at a little bit over 50%. Now, voting today in Iqaluit, the lines were very simple to get through. I had a 10-minute wait. Towards the end of the day, people were having more of a 5-minute wait. It was not that long at all. Now, to remind you of this riding, previously this riding was held by the NDP's Mumilak Kakak, who opted not to run this time. Now this time she won. Last time she won this riding with just 40% of the vote, and right now early, Lori Edlow is polling at slightly better than that. Now, things to remember about this riding: we are 3 time zones wide, so this is 1/5 geographically of the country. We've got a lot going on here today, and we also know that polls don't tell you anything in Nunavut. The idea of doing phone polling in Nunavut and actually getting a result that's usable, it's beyond conception. So we'll be here throughout the evening, and if anything changes here, we will be coming back to you directly. Back to you in Winnipeg.
Thanks a lot, Kent. We're going to be checking our social media out in a little bit here, but as we await results there in Nunavut, wonder if maybe Pam or Jody, you wanted to weigh in on Mumilak Kakak and the loss of her, I guess, in our House of Commons, in this House of Commons.
I think it's a significant loss. I mean, she was someone who was a truth teller. She challenged, she made sure that, the voices and the issues of Inuit were represented in Parliament. She was outspoken, she was of the people, she was on the ground. She tried to work with people outside of government. I mean, she's just really a unique person. Set aside whatever party she's in, that her as a person, she stood out as someone with incredible integrity and faced lots of challenges for that. Mm-hmm. But I think we can expect a lot more of her in the future as well.
Jody, did you want to weigh in at all on the loss of Mumilak? Not to say that the new representative for Nunavut won't do a great job, but I think Mumilak really stuck out for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I'm actually quite shocked and surprised to hear that result. And that's going to have devastating impacts for the Inuit people and for women.
Well, I think we've all probably been checking our phones here as we're seeing, all these numbers come in, seeing what people are saying on social media. Our social media editor, Savannah Kelly, has also been watching that part of the story. Let's head over to her now. Savannah?
Thank you, Dennis. We're nearing the end of this pandemic election, and to say that our viewers have had some strong opinions would definitely be an understatement. So let's take a look at some of those comments. First, we've got Anthony on Facebook, who foresees Justin Trudeau being re-elected for a third term, saying, it appears we must continue to hold JT's feet to the fire on Indigenous concerns. Lloyd said, return lands policies should be implemented by the federal government and pushed by First Nations peoples, as reservations were formed as concentration camps where permits were needed to leave reservations to hunt for food. Regardless of what happens tonight, Wendy wants to see the next federal government make amends with Indigenous peoples, saying no matter what happens tonight in this election, without repentance, we will not heal our relations nor our land. Gaja Gaines said, prevention dollars are allocated to 200 Indigenous child welfare agencies on an ongoing basis. It's imperative the funds be redirected to families and communities to stop the Millennium Scoop. Willie does not have much hope for the next federal government, saying, the government will never change their views or their colonial laws. It's just more words, nothing more. Our people are slaves to the Crown and Church. Rima said, the ignorance to spend money when it could be going where it's actually needed. Clean drinking water, housing, truth and reconciliation. And finally, Tanny on Facebook said, I really thought that the pandemic and the residential school graves, we would see a major shakeup from the usual Liberals and Conservatives.
I didn't see that kind of.
The voting results are still rolling in, and it's not too late to share your election views and everything that's going on tonight. You can connect with us on Facebook or Twitter and let us know, what do you think is going to be the result of tonight's election? And what would you like to see from the next federal government? Back to you in the studio.
Thanks so much for that, Savannah. So I'm curious, I mean, you are one of our social media gurus here. Were you surprised by engagement or lack of engagement on this this federal election that nobody really seemed to be in the mood for?
I think that there's kind of two sides to it. I think a lot of people are maybe interested for the wrong reasons, where they're angry and upset about the way that this election came together, with Justin Trudeau calling it 2 years earlier than he needed to. So I think that that's got a lot of people fired up and making their opinions known online. But overall, I don't know. I don't think that people are interested in having an election and really engaging with that right now, because, you know, we've got a lot of other concerns on our minds right now, of course, but we've definitely seen a lot of engagement online, but, you know, a lot of angry people too.
And social media, of course, lots of people that we hear from are younger people. Where are you seeing can you divide certain types of reactions based on what social media platform it is? Like, are you seeing kind of a happier tone on one or an angrier tone on one? If you can give us any insight into that.
I would say that a lot of our young people are being very active with their political views and opinions of what's going on TikTok, which has been really interesting to see, because we weren't on TikTok during the last federal election. So people are really engaging a lot. And I think what I've seen the difference is a lot of the young people really want to see a big shakeup. They don't want to see the regular going back between the Liberals and Conservatives. They really want to see something new. So it's been interesting to kind of see that, because we've got young voters that didn't vote in the last federal election, or, you know, they're kind of entering the political sphere for the first time. So it's just, yeah, it's interesting to see how their opinions and stuff are really coming into the sphere and making an impact now.
Yeah.
Jody, you know, we're hearing that people didn't want an election 2 years earlier. They're angry, they want to change, and yet here we are, pretty much right back where we are. They couldn't have been that mad, right? I mean, we're looking at basically the exact same result.
Yeah, and now I think you're going to have an even angrier society. You spent $610 million of taxpayers' money to tell you the same thing that you already knew.
Yeah.
So it's infuriating, actually.
Well,
Yeah.
are you furious?
No, you know what? I'm going to take a different tack than I think a few of the people here, and maybe it might not be as popular as everybody else, but there's a couple of things. Early election. Stephen Harper called an early election. Justin Trudeau is not the only one that has done that. Brian Pallister called an early election here in Manitoba. That's the way the parliamentary system works, and that's the way the politics works here in Canada in the Westminster system. So to say that an early election is ridiculous and
I think it's just because it was in the middle of a pandemic. You know?
No, I understand that too, but also, there's certain things that we want to get done in this country, and the other thing that I want to take a little exception to is the fact that people are talking about how they think that nothing or very little is being done for Indigenous people. For the Métis Nation, that's not what's been happening here. Yeah. I'm the Minister of Housing, and I'm building more houses. There's more houses happening in Manitoba since 1993. 1993, that's a heck of a long time ago. And I've got seniors that are just phoning me up every day asking for houses in their communities, and we're able to do that now. So the fact that not everything is happening all at the same time, I think one of the things that we need to look at is what Justin Trudeau has been able to do in the last 5 years, and the fact that it's an early election. I'm not all for spending $600 million, but I am for the fact that we can get things done. And if we're going to have a minority or a majority, I think that I do agree with what Michael said earlier. People need to work together. Elections aren't the place for that to happen. Once everything, the smoke is settled and everything is we figure out who's who in the zoo, then there's going to have to be some discussions amongst the NDP, amongst the Liberals, amongst the Bloc, amongst the Greens even. Obviously the other two parties, they're not really good at working with others, playing the same sandbox. But if at the end of the day that I can go back to my seniors and say, I can now build more houses for you, I can put childcare facilities in your community, those things I think are going to make differences in lives for sure for the Métis Nation. And I want to make sure that that's underlined, because I think some of that is getting lost in the conversation we're having here tonight.
Yeah.
Pam, your thoughts?
Well, that's really great.
Go ahead.
That the Métis Nation was able to get housing. We still have over 51 boil water advisories in First Nations. We have over 30,000 First Nations children in foster care. I mean, it's appalling the living conditions. We have mold, we have housing crises on many First Nations across this country. And $610 million could have gone to make a huge impact in our nations. So I don't agree whatsoever that this needed to be called. And we haven't seen a huge change so far in power. And he also brought huge dishonor to one of our own, Jody Wilson-Raybould.
Pam, I'm curious, speaking to something that Michael had brought up and Will just reiterated too, people need to play nice together in the sandbox being Ottawa. We were looking at the results tonight. Do you have any hope that there's going to be any cooperative anything going forward between all of these parties? I mean, the breakdown is basically the same as what it was, and we didn't see a lot of cooperation and playing nice. Do you think it's going to change now?
Well, I think we shouldn't undercut the level to which the Trudeau government in a minority parliament actually did some pretty significant things with the urging of the NDP, in terms of increasing funding, passing Bill C-15, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There's some significant things that were done in the minority with the NDP pushing, so the NDP always there, and the NDP coming out strong and saying, listen, we're not going to support you on X unless you do Y. Mm-hmm. And they did that throughout the whole pandemic to force, sick time and CERB supports and student supports and all of that stuff. So even beyond Indigenous issues, they were forced to work together, and they did, in fact, work together. So I imagine if this is another Liberal minority government, and they're going to be forced once again to have to work with parties to move forward on issues that we care about, and hold them to account.
Yeah.
Michael, there was big promises here. It's going to be another minority Liberal government. Big promises on boil water advisories. Where you're from, Shamattawa, Cree Nation, one of the only places in Manitoba still without clean drinking water. Do you think that this is a chance to finish those promises?
Here's the thing that I think is really frustrating. Throughout this entire election campaign, what we've been hearing from every politician is, I'm going to quote the number of TRC calls to action that refer to boil water advisories, if that's what we're talking about, or mass graves at residential schools, if that's what we're talking about. And people can quote the TRC until they're blue in the face, but the reality is the lack of implementation and the calls to actions is what the real frustration is. And so, credit where credit is due. I think we have to acknowledge that Shoal Lake 40, the place where Winnipeg gets our drinking water, recently was able to lift its boiling water advisory, which is fantastic. But I can't help but think about my relatives in Shamattawa First Nation and many other First Nations out there that are under a boil water advisory, and that we have to do better in this country. What would our millions of dollars have done from this by-election or this election done to help address those water issues? Maybe we buy a bunch of pipelines for water.
I mean,
We're like, why don't we?
Why doesn't that happen? It is crazy though, right? To think, some communities like Shoal Lake 40, 4 years ago in 4 years, they now have a new school. They have a road that they can get in and out of all season. And they have clean drinking water for the first time in 26 years. Yeah. But we see other communities still 26 years later, like Niskantiga, that they're still without.
Well, and I think that's the frustration, right? I think we see what's possible in Canada when there is political will. And we see it here, but we don't see it over there. How come to this nation, not to that nation? How come to this group, not to that group? And so it gets, it's frustrating, right? Because politics often pits people against one another. And so I really hope, and what I'm seeing a lot more of and what makes me encouraged is a lot what I see from the voters. All right, I'm seeing a lot of voters that are standing up for other people's issues, not just their own. And I feel very encouraged by that, and I think there needs to be a lot more of that, about people using their privileges and their platforms to stand up for other folks. There's a lot more of that from the voters, and I hope that the people running for these elections can learn from it.
Now that we know that we're going to have a Liberal minority here, maybe we could go around the horn a little on cabinet ministers and whether they stay the same. Mark Miller, Carolyn Bennett. Pam, do you want to start that off? Do you think we'll see Miller and Bennett back in those roles?
It's really hard to say because, the Trudeau government hasn't really wanted to move Bennett out of where she is in terms of all of these negotiating tables across the country. I mean, that they separated the departments. He was put there. We had Seamus at first for minister, and then Mark Miller. Mark Miller tends not to make waves, which is also beneficial, and he's spoken out, against the violence in Mi'kma'ki. He's challenged the Minister of Public Safety, Bill Blair, on racism in the RCMP, something you usually don't see, and to do it at the same kind of press conference. So I think Mark is the kind of minister that doesn't make waves for Trudeau, so I can't imagine that he would switch him out. Bennett is far more controversial, but he seems to have her to the side working on this negotiated table. So I don't know, I can't really see a mix-up unless there's a significant change in who gets elected and, as we go forward.
I have a question for Jody. Trudeau had said at the leaders' debate, that his party is interested in dismantling the Indian Act and doing so, with individual approaches to different nations. Do you think? He's been in government for two terms. Do you have any faith that that's going to happen in the third?
I have very little faith, but what I think is hopeful is that we are seeing Indigenous legal traditions brought into the court systems. We're seeing, the two-row wampum being honored in their own territories, saying the Canadian state politics need to stay out of our nation. So the assertion of sovereignty is taking place, which is going to force the Canadian state in a different position in a relationship with First Nations across the country. So I think the more that we assert ourselves as sovereign nations, the Canadian state is going to have to respond differently to us and interact differently. And so we are going to hold them accountable. We are going to demand that the TRC calls to actions are met and that the calls for justice on the missing and murdered Indigenous women, like, enough is enough. It's 2021. We want leaders who believe in systemic change. We want First Nations living equitable lives, the same as Canadians, and we're not going to tolerate anything less.
Does another minority government give them an out on some of these things? Say, no, we don't, we're only a minority here, we can't do it.
You know, I would have to say being a minority government has forced them to work a little harder. I'm worried about if one party becomes the total governing party, then they have no checks and balances.
Michael, you were hoping for another minority. What are your thoughts? It looks like the NDP's got a couple more seats, maybe. Still lots to go here tonight, but up from where they were.
I like the idea that there is a minority government that has to work with other parties. I think right now, we've seen during this pandemic what happens when the NDP can push the Liberal government a little bit more, a little bit farther. But the other thing I think that's exciting about this election and what's happening right now is that we get to see that the representation that we had at the beginning of the election is almost the exact same as what we have now. And so I know that people are talking about, what was the point of this election? But I think the one thing that we can take away from this is that what was happening for the last 2 years, we can expect that that's what Canadians seem to want to see more of. And so let's keep going, I guess.
Well, just quickly, I mean, is this what you were wanting to see more of? You deal directly with these ministers, this government. Is this a pretty good outcome?
Well, I would rather be able to talk to somebody who can make a decision. So I'm a little bit more open to having a majority government with people who want to work with at least the Métis Nation on a nation-to-nation, government-to-government basis. Not saying that the minority government can't do that. While you still are letting me on the microphone, I want to give a shout out to a friend of mine who's winning in Edmonton, Greaseback, Blake Desjarlais, young Métis candidate running for the NDP from the Métis settlements. Super guy. He gets in Parliament. It's going to be great for all Canadians, especially his constituents.
Seen a number of numbers popping up there for Indigenous candidates. It'll be interesting to see if we'll have more in the House of Commons this time around. We're going to send it back over to Ottawa and our Brett Forrester. Brett?
Thanks, Dennis. It's getting late in the night, but Wayne Garnons-Williams is still here with me in Ottawa. Mr. Garnons-Williams, pardon me. It's looking like we are going to return to a Liberal-led minority government. Trudeau gambled on a pandemic election that many did feel was unnecessary. To what extent did it pay off?
Well, it's status quo in the sense that the promises made, we'll see. Let's see part 3 of this, how the third act plays out. But there's 3 things to watch out for Canadians out there, and those are the 3 bellwether indicators. One, of course, is the speech from the throne, and that'll show the government's general priorities. The second is the budget, taking those general priorities and putting money behind them. And the third one, of course, is the ministerial mandate letters. Those things are vital because that is delegation of authority and getting results for Canadians. So those 3 documents are the most crucial coming up now. What's in it? How are Indigenous people going to realize the fulfillment of those objectives? And hopefully we'll still see the same priority that the previous Trudeau governments have had with Indigenous peoples and Indigenous priorities.
And where do we go from here? What do you see as some of those hot button issues? As you just mentioned, in the last budget, there was $18 billion split between the 2 Indigenous departments. They were able to pass Bill C-15. However, they've left a lot of things up in the air. They have pledged to compensate the victims of the willfully underfunded child welfare system. And there is still the outstanding issue of about 50 boil water advisories. So what are you looking for in the next round of Parliament?
Well, I'm hoping that we still have this process where we don't have, Indigenous peoples don't have to prove their rights in the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm hoping that there's still negotiation and receptivity to develop those rights. As Jody Wilson-Raybould said in a speech to the to the AFN, she commented about the fact that the Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, dealing with Aboriginal treaty rights, is a black box. And she said, let's fill the black box. Let's let's fill it with light and fill it with the rights that should be there. And then let's negotiate those rights. Let's continue on that path and avoid the costly, time-consuming, expensive court cases, and let's just get on with realizing those Indigenous rights.
Now, you just mentioned Jody Wilson-Raybould. When she announced that she would not seek re-election, she decried Parliament, calling it toxic, regressive, and hyper-partisan. Similarly, NDP MP Mumilak Kakak decried the racism that she experienced within Parliament. So this seems to be a pretty clear message from the electorate that they want the parties to work together. Do you think that's going to happen?
I'm hopeful because, again, quite frankly, a majority government gets a little arrogant. They have the mandate to rule. With a minority government, there's an obligation to work with another party. And that's actually good for Canadians because then we see compromise. And the end, and it's most likely that Liberals are going to probably try and form a government with the NDP. So we're going to see a level of compromise. And when you look at those NDP policies in relationship to Indigenous peoples, they're a lot better than the current Liberal policies platforms.
Now I want to talk about Aaron O'Toole's campaign a little bit. He ran his campaign from the center, which seemed to frustrate a lot of the Liberal attacks on him and the wedge issues early on. But that was also a gamble because it risked alienating votes on the right. So how has the Conservative strategy worked out for him this election?
Yeah, it's really weird because Aaron O'Toole and the Conservative Party does one thing and yet completely go and do a reverse angle and do the other thing, the opposite. Like, for example, the Conservatives voted en masse against the passing of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Parliament. And yet in the campaign, in the English debates, O'Toole said that he'd be appointing Chief Wilton Littlechild to be special counsel to the Conservative government on the implementation of UNDRIP. So you can't do both. It's just, and it's the same thing with the environment. In the Conservative caucus, they couldn't get a vote to support the fact that climate change is an issue caused by humans, and yet O'Toole still has to go out there and try and sell the fact that he's for climate change. He's going to battle it. It just it's full of controversy and full of inconsistency with respect to the Conservative Party right now.
Okay, there's a lot more to talk about, but we're going to have to leave it there. Mr. Garnons-Williams, that will have to do it for us tonight here in Ottawa. I want to thank you for joining me. Melissa and Dennis, back to you in Winnipeg.
And a big thanks from us here as well too. Pam, you were saying you wanted to talk a little bit about the PPC and their votes that they were receiving tonight.
Yes, I can't understand why no one's talking about the People's Party of Canada. Look at what the election universe has done. First of all, it's taken at least 300,000 votes away from the Conservatives. Mm-hmm. Maxime Bernier has lost his seat. The People's Party has gained a seat. So it's essentially the best of all of what they would complain about as being cancel culture. They literally canceled themselves and some of the Conservatives at the same time. I mean, that's a jewel in this election.
Anybody else have any thoughts on the People's Party? Bernier didn't have a seat, so they started with 0, but they're gonna not have any again anyways, but I think did play spoiler probably in some seats, including in this province. Anyone else want to weigh in on the People's Party and what impact they could have going forward?
I gotta be honest, in Winnipeg North, we had a People's Party candidate, and the candidate himself was actually quite charming, actually quite a nice seeming individual. A lot of his ideas and things that he recommended were things that were not reflected at all in the PPC platform.
Right.
And so, nice guy, but I don't know that a lot of the candidates were, candidate type candidates that read the policy and go out and here's the marching orders of the party. And so, you know, they may be benefiting from things like that. What if a bunch of people are voting for the nice random person in their community as opposed to the big scary Mad Max party?
Well, and I mean, when we talk about a record number of Indigenous candidates, 77 candidates this time around, some of them were People's Party of Canada candidates.
Yeah.
So.
We should mention too, Toronto Centre, that's where Green Party leader Annamie Paul is running. She is not going to win that seat there. We have the national chief, Roseanne Archibald.
Yes, looks like the Green Party could lose a seat, but yes, we do have standing by there. She is the national chief, Roseanne Archibald, joining us from Vancouver. National chief, what are your thoughts on this Liberal minority government?
Well, I think it's oh, sorry, there's a bit. My, if you can hear that.
I think we can make out what you're saying.
Okay, it really signals. I'm just going to turn to distracting me. Hang on a second. So yeah, for me, it signals that Canadians wanted some form of stability during this pandemic. And so we went into this election with a minority and we came out with a minority Liberal government. And to me, that speaks to the need for stability right now during the pandemic. And that's what the people have said across Canada.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this changes anything for the AFN?
Not in a significant way. You know, we've worked, all of us, a number of us on the AFN executive, established positive relations with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, members of his cabinet over many years. And so we anticipate that we'll be able to maintain those relationships and build on them further.
Yeah, National Chief, what are you hoping to see out of this new Liberal government?
We did see significant investment in First Nations during their tenure since they've been elected, and we certainly want to see that continue. There's still a lot of work to be done. Well, water advisories is around the unmarked graves, the recovery of our little ones. All of these issues stay at the forefront in our minds, and so I think ultimately we see that we have a willing partner, which I think is a very positive thing, to know that the government has been re-elected. They were a willing partner before the election, and hopefully we can maintain that momentum of continuing to improve the lives of First Nations and Indigenous people across Canada.
Well, National Chief, we'll leave it there. Do appreciate you spending some time with us. I'm sure we'll probably be catching up with you tomorrow on a better connection.
Thank you, Dennis. Take care.
Thank you. I believe we're going to go over to the big wheel now. Melissa's going to spin the wheel, and we're going to check in on some ridings.
Let's take a look at party standings right now. 158 seats for the Liberals, 120 for the Conservatives, NDP 29 for the Bloc as well. The Greens lost a seat. They're down to 2 from 3. Annamie Paul, as we said, Green Party leader, did not win her seat in Toronto Centre. I do want to take a look, though, some interesting stuff going on in Kenora. This is Eric Malillo's riding. He's the incumbent. This is a riding that's gone back and forth between the Liberals and the Conservatives forever. Well, look at who's out in the lead here. Janine Seymour, Indigenous candidate for the NDP. She's in the lead right now, so we're going to want to keep an eye on that. Wanted to go to another one that an upset could have been in the making. Churchill, Kuwait-Nook, ASCII, Shirley Robinson had support of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, Manitoba MKO, SCO, the Northern Chiefs, the Southern Chiefs. Everybody was seemingly on side with Shirley Robinson. Nikki Ashton has been declared the winner there, and Shirley, who was thought could have been the one to upset that apple cart, didn't. She's is currently sitting here in third. Want to go and take a look. Winnipeg North, that was another one. A very young Indigenous woman who was running there, hoping to unseat Kevin Lamoureux, longtime Liberal MP there. Melissa Chung Mowat, she is Indigenous, she's Chinese. She had a big movement behind her. Doesn't look like the ground game made it. And I mean, Kevin Lamoureux's got a team that is pretty incredible, and you see this election after election. So that's some of the more interesting ridings that I can tell you about right now, and we're still, of course, waiting for the ones further west to get tallied. Where are we going now? You want to go back to you, Dennis? Do we get another reporter to go to?
Yeah, well, Michael, two of those ridings that we just looked at impact you in significant ways. Winnipeg North and Churchill, Quaitanock. Shirley Robinson not going to likely beat Nikki Ashton there, despite chiefs across Manitoba urging people to vote for Shirley Robinson. And as well, the Liberals are probably going to hang on to the seat in Winnipeg North as well. Your thoughts?
Well, I think what this goes to show is, I think it was said earlier, the only poll that matters is on election day. And this goes to show the difference between people who have a strong social media campaign and a strong social media game versus people that have a strong get out the vote machine, right? And so I think that's really what we're seeing here. The success in Winnipeg North of Kevin Lamoureux is that established political machine, even though there was tons of social media focus around Melissa, and then similar situation happening in the North, where we had a lot of buzz around Shirley, but we see the political machine of the Ashtons coming to the rescue of Nikki there for the victory.
But at the same time, I think, though, that also tells Nikki that she's got a lot of work to do to repair some bridges with both First Nations and Métis voters. So
I hope it tells both ridings that they both need to do better, because disappointment, there's enough disappointment going around for everybody.
That's the line of the night, I think, right there.
It's the headline of this election.
Into the next election, there's still enough disappointment to go around for everyone. Maybe out west, Jody, we're talking about some of the ridings that we're watching here, many of them with an Indigenous candidate in them. Anishinaabe Kwe leading in Kenora. The NDP could win that for the first time. Any ridings that you've been keeping an eye on that are sparking some interest for you or surprising you?
Well, for me right now, I'm wondering about what has the provincial politics impacted sort of the national politics. As we've seen in Alberta with the UCP governing here and the outbreak of the COVID, people are sort of turned away, and we typically have been a blue province. So it's going to be interesting to see if the color changes due to poor regional governing.
Yeah, lots of other elections coming up here in the not too distant future too in Alberta. Pam, anything for you, any ridings that you were keeping a keen eye on?
Well, always keeping an eye on what's happening in Manitoba. We already know the results from Mi'kmaq. We know Jaime got back in. He's Mi'kmaq, but Jeff Ward didn't get back in, both from the same. And of course, what happens in Manitoba? Manitoba's so central in terms of Indigenous politics and resistance and advocacy. So it was important to see what was going to happen there. And I just think on a larger level, there's also all the Cree who are running from Abitibi, Bay James, in that area. Like a big group of people running, and I think that would have been significant. And in terms of where we go, because if you look at Romeo Saginash, and NDP MP, who's also from the same area, so there would be a strong legacy of people from that territory really engaging with government. So it would be interesting to know how all of those elections played out, whether it was for the Liberals or the NDP.
Will, you had mentioned one riding you were watching out west, but any other observations?
Yeah, no, I just watching some of the results coming in here. Of course, Dan Vandel, who's the cabinet minister, citizen of the Métis Nation, friend. Good to see him back in, I'm obviously it's pretty obvious where my heart lies and what I want to accomplish, because I want to accomplish something for my people. Just as like all of the MMF's cabinet wants to do. But at the same time, if we got someone like Blake, who's a young Métis guy who's running and hopefully winning in Edmonton, I think that says a lot for Indigenous content, because a fellow like him gets into the House of Commons, you're going to hear some of the issues that his people are facing, not only in his riding but in his nation as well. I think that those are really important things to watch. And before, I know we're getting close to the end here. Nobody has said it yet, but I want to say Melissa did a fantastic job at the debate, and we forgot to say that earlier on here today. But I just wanted to give a big kudos to Melissa for that. Good job.
Thanks, and I'm happy that you were here on debate night, holding down the fort.
Yes, I was proud.
Yeah, Dennis and I were we were holding it down just for you. So yeah.
Thank you.
I believe we have Lindsay Richardson is still at Liberal Party headquarters. Still an empty room over there, Lindsay?
I'm still here.
You're the only one still. Isn't it like midnight there?
It's getting late. It's getting late, but the party hasn't really started yet. So as you guys well know, we have called a Liberal minority government. So after 5 weeks and hundreds of millions of dollars, we're essentially back where we started. So there have been some developments on the national scale. The Liberal Party does have almost as many seats as before, just over 150 at last count. Not quite the 170 needed for a majority government, but still a satisfying outcome here. Now, the Liberal Party did lose some ground in other parts of Canada, in Atlantic Canada mainly, and in the prairies, which seem to be voting primarily Conservative. And some prominent Liberal Party members have actually lost their seats. Minister Bernadette Jordan, for example, is no longer holding her riding. So some areas in Canada, especially in the Atlantic, have yet to call their ridings. We are waiting for those results to come in. And we are also in the 45-minute countdown until the man himself, Justin Trudeau, comes out to address the crowd here at the Fairmont Queen Elizabeth Hotel. And we keep coming back to this point. This really is an unprecedented kind of election. In 2019, the election space was filled with Liberal Party cohort supporters, MPs, familiar faces, and we're just not getting that this year. So let's see what happens in 45 minutes. Will the space fill up? Will,
it would be a flood if it did.
Oh yeah, definitely. So, but we can blame the pandemic, but there has to be quite a few MPs, quite a few Liberal candidates here in Montreal and beyond that are satisfied with the outcome of tonight's polls. And like I said before, we will have all the updates on what the Prime Minister has to say, what the next promises are tomorrow. But it is worth mentioning there are some other important things to keep an eye open for in a Liberal minority government. One of them will be the Governor General's speech from the throne that is upcoming, so there will be some priorities outlined during that speech, as well as the budget. Where is the funding going to be going moving forward? So we'll have all that information for you as we get it. So in the meantime, back to you.
Love it. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Lindsay, for that. We've been talking about Trudeau, and I'm told we're going to go to Ottawa quickly here, but maybe we'll get a chance to talk about the future of Aaron O'Toole. And there you are, Brett, back to you in Ottawa.
Thanks, Dennis. I'm still here with Wayne Gardens-Williams. You are, as I said in my introduction, an expert on international intertribal trade. So what do you look for from that vantage point in an election like this?
With this election, with the Trudeau government, staying the course is important because an awful lot of work has been done. The exercise of Indigenous sovereignty needs to have the economic underpinnings of economic sovereignty for First Nations to go forward. And to do that, we need to look at the exercise, the inherent exercise of intertribal trade, something that had been existed since time immemorial and that was taken away with the imposition of the Indian Act. But it's something that has resurged in this Trudeau era, where, as I said, the mandate letter with respect to that we're going to negotiate rights as opposed to force individual Indigenous peoples to prove the right. Well, intertribal trade is one of those rights that has been accepted by the federal government and has been implemented internationally. And we're not the only ones. Around the world, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, South America, Central America, Indigenous peoples are starting to exercise their inherent economic rights. And they're starting to come together to form trade alliances. And Canada is leading the forefront with New Zealand in developing these intertribal trade opportunities. So this is an exciting time, and I'm happy that the Liberal government is going to continue on with the status quo, with moving forward on these initiatives, because we need to get, and we've already got a couple of major trade, nation-state to nation-state trade agreements that have Indigenous clauses in it that protect Indigenous intertribal trade and that inherent right. So this is an exciting time as an Indigenous trade lawyer. I just want to remind people that people say, oh, we want the Jay Treaty back. The Jay Treaty of 1794 is something that captured that aspect of intertribal trade. I just want to read this because it's really cool. It's Article 3 of the Jay Treaty. It says, Indians dwelling on either side of said boundary line shall freely pass and repass, land and navigate the respective territories and countries of the two parties on the continent of America, and to navigate all lakes and waters thereof, and to freely carry on trade and commerce with each other. That's intertribal trade that's captured in 1794. So, because of the Indian Act, it's caused a problem. One of the things we can do is get rid of Section 88 of the Indian Act, which provides power over Indigenous peoples by the provincial government. If we got rid of Section 88, that would be a big step forward in helping Indigenous sovereignty.
Now you mentioned economic sovereignty there. Economic reconciliation is really the center of Aaron O'Toole's Indigenous platform. Does that kind of get to the heart of what you're talking about?
Take a cup of knowledge from where you can get it, because the Conservatives do have bench strengths. One of those bench strengths is good economic horse sense. So, for example, the appointment of Wilton Littlechild as the special advisor to Prime Minister O'Toole, which looks like it's not going to be, but take that idea and get someone like a well-respected international human rights lawyer like Wilton Littlechild, and make them help us move forward on these economic initiatives, to be the ear to the Prime Minister, to advise him on moving ahead on these important economic platforms.
Okay, I think we're going to just put a pin in that for a moment. Thank you, Mr. Wayne Gardens-Williams. Winnipeg?
We're all in amazement over here right now, still just listening to Wayne. Has international trade ever sounded so exciting?
Yeah.
Brett, while we still have you, I mean, as the host of Nation to Nation, a new season's going to be kicking off here in about 2 weeks or less even. What are some of your takeaways here?
Well, I think some of my takeaways I hinted at a little bit earlier. You know, this is a pretty strong message from the Canadian electorate that they want the parties to play ball together. So what will that mean as we enter a parliamentary session that's actually supposed to be sitting right now? What will be in the budget, and what type of new bills could we see introduced? That being said, there are a couple things that I will be watching for. One will be to see if they finalize the agreement in principle to settle a national class action lawsuit about access to clean water on First Nations reserves that was signed very shortly before the election was called. So I'll be looking to see if that's resolved. I'll be looking for the government to make some progress on resolving another class action lawsuit. This one is related to kids in care. Of course, there is a decision pending currently before the federal court as to whether Ottawa will have to compensate the victims of the underfunded child welfare system through the Canadian Human Rights Act. There's still a potential that that decision could go against the government. So that's another hot button issue that I'll be watching for as Parliament kicks off.
No, it's great timing for us. I mean, you start next month, fresh government, not necessarily looking much different than the old government was looking, but I'm certainly excited for Nation to Nation, you taking over that program. I look forward to that. I know all of us here in Winnipeg are chomping at the bit to see what you bring to that table too. And
I'm
your
sure
first,
Wayne will be at the table
we're
with
all
you.
we all hope that Wayne is part of that as well. We loved Wayne. We love listening to you. You could have your own show and have us tune in every week.
Well, Brett, we'll leave it there with you tonight, but big thanks to you and Wayne there as well.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay, thanks.
We're down to our final 6 minutes here. Maybe we'll go around, starting with you, Pam. What are you hoping for with this new parliament? What are you looking for?
Well, I hope they get back to business, in fact. Remember that we're still dealing with a pandemic. We're dealing with Canada's largest human rights crisis it's ever faced, the ongoing genocide of Indigenous peoples, especially Indigenous women and girls, that we're in a climate crisis. We have major economic issues disproportionately impacting women. And so I would hope that the parties get down to business, get their minds focused back on what's in the best interests of Canadians and in particular Indigenous peoples, and get rolling on all of these promises that they put in their platforms. Whether or not they got elected or how the numbers spill out, they made promises, they need to implement them.
Jody, any parting thoughts for yourself? What you're looking forward to in this next parliament, if anything?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to in the next 100 days how the Canadian state is going to plan consultation on the framework for implementing UNDRIP. I look to see the implementation of the calls to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, as well as the calls for justice for the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Inquiry. I look forward to seeing how they're going to invest $600 million in First Nations like they did on this election. So they have 100 days. I'll be watching.
That's like got anti-vibes written all over that. I'm deadly.
Michael, your thoughts? What we might see, what you'd like to see?
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that I'm excited that I know we'll all be seeing is congratulations to Leah Gazan, Indigenous woman who just won in Winnipeg Centre.
Yep.
So congratulations to her. It's great to see strong Indigenous women leading. I always have a lot more faith in a system that has a bunch of strong Indigenous women leading. And so congratulations to the candidates like Leah. But I also just want to say to all of the Indigenous leaders that ran and didn't get elected today, just because you didn't get elected, it doesn't mean we don't need you. And so I look forward to all of those Indigenous candidates that ran and were not successful in continuing the work that we desperately need them to do to be an effective local opposition to whoever did get elected, so that Indigenous topics and Indigenous solutions and the beauty and the genius that is inherently present within First Nation, Métis and Inuit communities is actually recognized in a meaningful way by this upcoming government, because I feel like we got a lot of genius in our communities that's not being recognized. And I think that the leaders that have run in this election are a beautiful demonstration of that.
I love
So
that you pointed
everybody
that
better
out.
look out.
Yeah, I love that you pointed that out. That's something that I had not thought of. You might not be having a seat in Parliament right now, but it doesn't mean that you're not still valuable as we all go forward. Well,
yeah, a couple of things that I think we need to, we haven't talked about at all, is the advance polls and the mail-in ballots.
Right.
There could be some really close races. I'm watching Charleswood, I'm watching Saskatoon West, and there's only 200 or 300 votes, and that's going back and forth. So I think that's one thing. We may not know some things until tomorrow. It's hard to follow after Michael, because it's just I'm just having such a fun time with everyone in the group here tonight. But obviously, one thing that hasn't been said tonight is congratulations to the Prime Minister on his re-election. And I think that's very important for us to consider that and make sure that that's well known. But at the same time, working together. I think that there's some Canadians are telling the Parliament to work together, and I think that there's a few things that need to be done. One of them, as always, I speak for my people. The Métis Nation has a land claims that is not quite done yet. That needs to be on the table. From what I understand, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is putting it on the table, and we look forward to getting that finished soon, very soon. Because it's been 151 years, so we would
It's
like
time.
to. I don't want to wait another 151 years. It's time.
yeah. We should mention too, just quickly, Dan Vandel in St. Boniface, St. Vital, looking like he has been confirmed as victor. He, of course, was the Liberal incumbent there and Minister of Northern Affairs.
Yeah.
I was going to say Northern Developments, but that's an old one.
Still some flip-flopping, as I just saw there in Kenora. It's now gone back to the Conservatives. The NDP still in second, but lots of back and forth there. Same as in Saskatchewan with Robert Doucette as well. So.
And I haven't had a chance to see what's coming in BC. I mean, it's still fairly early there.
Yeah.
So just because we're going to be wrapping up here momentarily doesn't mean that you can't be sitting online well into the wee hours to see how it all shakes down in some key ridings in BC for sure, and Alberta.
From the looks of the Liberal headquarters there, we'll probably all be home before anybody even enters the room and the speeches start. So
thinking of how empty that was, it's like, is it because of COVID or is it because they themselves aren't even interested in this election enough to show up and like toast each other?
Well, I'd be curious to see what the voter turnout numbers are, right? Because I bet you it's going to be super low.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what Liberal headquarters looks like, I can just imagine what Conservative headquarters must be.
Or People's Party.
Or the People's Party.
Hey, they're probably having a party.
There's five
That's
people.
probably because that's probably the people that are there shooting with Lindsay. The APTN camera person.
Does look a lot
Lindsay,
like the crew there.
Maybe.
We should thank our crew as well as we wrap up our election 2021 news special. Maybe there'll be 2023 soon. But thanks to our guests for joining us so much. Will, Michael, Jody, Pam.
We love you guys. Then that you could join us for these 2 hours, and our crew, like Jenna said, thank you guys for putting this all together. Busy day, and I guess we will see you back here tomorrow. We will have lots of coverage on APTN National News tomorrow. Until then, have a great night from all of us.
Good night.